Have you ever walked away from a conversation feeling like your emotions betrayed you, like something was off, but you couldn't quite explain why? Maybe you started questioning yourself, your memory, even your sanity. That's often the silent signature of emotional manipulation. Emotional manipulation doesn't always show up with red flags. It's quiet, subtle. It creeps in through guilt, confusion, charm, and control, until one day you realize you're no longer sure where your thoughts end and someone else's begin. This episode isn't just about identifying manipulators. It's about understanding what happens inside you when someone tries to bend your reality. Because the most dangerous part isn't always the person pulling the strings. It's the traps your own mind sets for you along the way. Cognitive dissonance, self-doubt, a fractured sense of identity. We'll explore how emotional manipulation works, why it's so effective, and what it does to your inner world. You'll learn how to spot it early, what psychological traps to avoid, and, most importantly, how to rebuild a strong sense of self that can't be easily shaken. Whether you're recovering from manipulation or trying to guard against it, this episode will give you clarity, tools, and a deeper understanding of your own mind. Because protecting yourself isn't just about seeing through others, it's about seeing yourself clearly, even when the world around you tries to distort that view. Let's get into it. Emotional manipulation is a form of psychological influence where someone uses your emotions against you to gain control, power, or advantage, often without your full awareness. Unlike obvious forms of abuse, manipulation hides behind a mask of concern, affection, or logic. It doesn't scream, it whispers. At its core, emotional manipulation plays on your empathy, your fears, your need to be understood, and your desire to be liked or accepted. The manipulator doesn't need to force you. They get you to second-guess yourself until you're the one doing the work for them. Some of the most common tactics include gaslighting, making you doubt your memory, perception, or judgment. That never happened, or you're too sensitive. Guilt-tripping, using your sense of responsibility or kindness to get you to comply. Love-bombing, overwhelming you with affection, praise, or gifts to lower your defenses, only to withdraw them once control is gained. Silent treatment, punishing you with emotional withdrawal, making you anxious and desperate to reconnect. Projection, accusing you of feelings or actions they're actually guilty of, creating confusion and defensiveness. What makes emotional manipulation so disorienting is that it often comes wrapped in care. The manipulator may seem concerned for your well-being or frame their actions as just trying to help. That's why victims often don't recognize it until the damage is deep. And it works not just because the manipulator is skilled, but because you care. You want to keep the peace, to understand them, to be fair. But emotional manipulators exploit that compassion, subtly moving the goalposts of reality until you're the one who feels selfish or crazy. Recognizing manipulation starts with awareness. Once you understand the patterns, you're no longer just reacting, you're observing. And that's the first step toward breaking free. To truly understand how emotional manipulation works, we have to look inward. Manipulators don't create our vulnerabilities, they exploit the ones already there. At the heart of it, we're wired for connection. From childhood, our survival depended on being accepted by our caregivers, our tribe, our community. That wiring doesn't just disappear in adulthood. We still seek approval, safety, love, and a sense of belonging. When these needs are unmet, or when we fear losing them, we become more pliable, more likely to bend ourselves to keep those bonds intact. Another key factor is conflict avoidance. Many of us have been conditioned to believe that keeping the peace is more important than speaking the truth. We'd rather tolerate discomfort than risk confrontation. Manipulators sense this and use it to slowly shift boundaries without resistance. Then there's self-doubt. Most people carry some form of insecurity about their worth, their judgment, or their ability to handle difficult emotions. When someone subtly reinforces those doubts, it's easy to start trusting their version of reality over your own. And finally, there's hope. This might seem like a strength, but in the context of manipulation, hope can keep us stuck. Hoping the other person will change, hoping things will go back to how they were, hoping that maybe it's just a phase. The truth is, we're not weak for being vulnerable. We're human. But the more we understand these emotional and psychological terrains, the more equipped we are to defend them. Because manipulation doesn't just happen when someone takes control. It happens when we unknowingly hand it over. One of the most disorienting effects of emotional manipulation is how it quietly distorts your sense of self. You don't just feel confused, you start losing touch with who you are. At first, the changes are subtle. You might hold back an opinion to avoid conflict. You downplay your feelings to keep the peace. You second-guess your gut and lean more on their version of events. Little by little, the lines that define you, your values, your boundaries, your voice, begin to blur. This is the identity shift, and it's one of the most dangerous outcomes of emotional manipulation. It's not forced, it's shaped. You adapt to survive the emotional terrain. You become who you think you need to be to stay safe, loved, or accepted. This can create what psychologists sometimes call a borrowed identity, a version of you molded by another person's preferences, expectations, or control. And the longer you stay in this dynamic, the more that borrowed self starts to feel normal, even though deep down you know something's missing. You may find yourself asking, why don't I recognize myself anymore? Why can't I trust my own thoughts? That's not weakness. That's the effect of long-term manipulation. It destabilizes your inner compass. The good news? Your true self isn't gone. It's buried under layers of fear, adaptation, and confusion, but it's still there. Reclaiming it starts with recognizing that the person you've become under manipulation isn't the person you have to stay. The journey back to yourself begins when you stop asking how to fix the relationship and start asking how to find your voice again. One of the most painful parts of emotional manipulation isn't what someone else does to you. It's what starts happening inside your own head. If this episode is hitting close to home, you're not alone. Take a moment to follow or share this with someone who needs it, because sometimes clarity begins with one honest conversation. When manipulation takes root, your mind becomes a battlefield. Logic clashes with emotion. Intuition gets drowned out by self-doubt. You know something feels wrong, but you can't seem to act on it. This is the essence of cognitive dissonance. When two conflicting truths live side by side in your brain, creating a mental and emotional tug-of-war. You might think, this person is hurting me, but also, they care about me. Or, I should leave, followed immediately by, but what if I'm just overreacting? Over time, This internal chaos leads to self-gaslighting, where you begin to dismiss your own thoughts and feelings before anyone else has to. You silence your inner voice out of fear that it's wrong, dramatic, or untrustworthy. You become your own critic, your own censor. And this is exactly what manipulation is designed to do: create enough confusion that you begin to police your own reality. The manipulator doesn't need to twist the facts anymore. You do it for them. This inner war is exhausting. It drains your confidence, clouds your judgment, and leaves you feeling powerless not just in the relationship, but in your own mind. But here's the truth. Confusion is not failure. It's a sign that your deeper self is still trying to get your attention. That discomfort, that tension, it's your mind resisting the distortion. And that resistance is where your strength still lives. The goal isn't to silence the noise immediately, it's to start listening for the voice underneath it, the one that still remembers who you are. Emotional manipulation is effective because it doesn't just affect your external behavior. It infiltrates your internal processing. Long after the manipulator says or does something, your mind keeps running the script. That's where mental traps come in, patterns of thought that keep you stuck, even when the situation becomes clearly unhealthy. Here are some of the most common traps to be aware of. 1. Cognitive dissonance. This is the internal clash between two conflicting beliefs, like knowing you're being mistreated, but still believing the person cares. To reduce the discomfort, your mind tries to justify or downplay what's happening. They didn't mean it, or it's not always bad. But staying in this space delays action and reinforces the cycle. 2. Over-justification. You find yourself explaining away the other person's behavior over and over. They had a rough childhood, they're under stress, or they didn't mean to hurt me. While empathy is important, over-justification keeps you stuck in rationalizations that override your emotional truth. 3. Self-doubt spiral. This is the loop where you start questioning your memory, feelings, and instincts. When you're told often enough that you're too sensitive, forgetful, or dramatic, you begin to internalize those labels. You may stop trusting your own experience, and that makes you easier to control. 4. Hope as bait. You hold on to the good moments, believing they represent the real version of the person. You think, if I just do this differently, things will go back to how they were. But hope becomes a trap when it's based on potential, not patterns. 5. Confusion masquerading as insight. Manipulators often use vague language, false logic, or pseudo-spiritual talk to make you feel like you're just not getting it. You mistake your confusion as a sign you need to try harder or learn more, when in fact the confusion is intentional. Every journey out of emotional manipulation begins with a single moment of clarity, a shift where confusion gives way to recognition. You start to notice patterns, not just incidents. It's no longer about a bad day or one harsh comment. It's about repeated cycles of control, guilt, and distortion. Often this turning point is subtle. It could be a conversation that leaves you emotionally drained for the 100th time, a realization that your boundaries keep getting ignored, or a quiet moment when you hear your own voice in your head whisper, "This isn't right." Sometimes it's someone from the outside, a friend, a therapist, a family member, offering a perspective that cuts through the fog. Other times, it's your body that speaks first. Constant anxiety, tension, exhaustion, or emotional numbness. Recognizing the pattern is like turning on a light in a room you didn't know was dark. It doesn't fix everything immediately, but it changes the game. You begin to observe instead of absorb. You start to name what's happening, and when you name it, you take the first step toward reclaiming your power. Recognition is not the end, it's the beginning of coming home to yourself. Once you recognize emotional manipulation for what it is, the next step is learning how to protect yourself, not just from others, but from the mental habits that made you vulnerable in the first place. This isn't about building walls, it's about building a shield, strong, flexible, and rooted in self-awareness. 1. Ground yourself in your values. Start by reconnecting with what matters to you. What do you believe in? What are your boundaries? When you're clear on your values, you're less likely to be pulled into someone else's narrative. Write them down, refer back when you feel lost. 2. Rebuild emotional boundaries. Boundaries aren't about keeping people out, they're about keeping you intact. If someone regularly dismisses, blames, or manipulates you, it's okay and necessary to limit your emotional availability. You don't owe constant access to people who drain you. 3. Question emotional logic. Manipulators often make you feel like their emotions are facts. If I'm hurt, you must be wrong. Learn to pause and ask, is this true, or does it just feel true? Emotions offer information, but they're not always the full picture. 4. Practice pattern recognition. Don't just listen to words, watch for repetition. Do you always end up apologizing? Do you feel confused after every disagreement? Manipulation thrives in the absence of patterns. Spotting those loops is key to breaking them. 5. Create reality anchors. Manipulation distorts your sense of reality. To counter this, establish external checkpoints. Journal your experiences, talk to trusted friends, or speak with a therapist. When you start to question yourself, these anchors keep you grounded in truth. 6. Trust your body. Before your mind knows, your body often does. Pay attention to physical cues. Tightness in your chest, stomach knots, fatigue after a conversation. These are signals, not coincidences. 7. Reclaim your voice. You may have learned to silence yourself to keep the peace. Start small. Speak up even if your voice shakes. Saying no, expressing your feelings, or simply disagreeing is how you begin to take up space again. A strong shield isn't about fear, it's about clarity. When you trust yourself, you become harder to influence, harder to confuse, and impossible to erase. When you've been emotionally manipulated, reclaiming your identity can feel like waking up in a house you've lived in for years, only to realize most of the furniture isn't yours. The pictures on the walls reflect someone else's version of you. The colors, the layout, the lighting, it all suited them, not you. You look around and think, wait, did I ever choose this? You might catch yourself pausing before sharing an opinion, wondering if it's really yours, or if it's what they'd approve of. You might feel a strange silence in your mind where confidence used to be. Even something as simple as choosing a meal, an outfit, or a song feels loaded with invisible pressure. You start asking, what do I actually like? What do I believe? If their voice isn't in my head, what's left? That's the identity crisis manipulation often leaves behind. Not a dramatic loss, but a quiet, confusing emptiness. It's not that you don't exist anymore. It's that you've been edited for so long, You're now reintroducing yourself to yourself. Identity is not a fixed destination. It's a living, breathing process. The fact that you're here, seeking clarity, means you're already on your way back to yourself. Emotional manipulation isn't always loud or obvious. It often works by making you doubt yourself, disconnect from your identity, and surrender your truth one small piece at a time. But the moment you begin to see the pattern, you start to reclaim your power. Remember, your mind is not your enemy. It's your ally once you learn to trust it again. You're not broken. You're rebuilding. With awareness, boundaries, and self-trust, you can shield yourself, not just from manipulation, but from the lies that kept you small. You've always had the strength. Now you have the tools to use it.